When it comes to the real-time or turn-based strategy genre, what's considered to be grand strategy or grand campaign design is often considered the pinnacle of that kind of development. And it's a very unique form of design that we see bits and pieces of in other genres. And I want to focus a little bit more about the pros and cons of it in today's video. So when we talk about the idea behind a grand campaign or grand strategy, what we mean is that the playthrough has persistence. Elements from how you play on one battle or one match will carry over to the next, and so on and so forth until you either win or lose. When we talk about the idea of a grand campaign, we can see this in a lot of turn-based games. Civilization probably being one of the more famous examples. Again, when we talk about grand strategy, nobody can discount Paradox Interactive with Europa Universalis, Stellaris, and you get the picture. But when I said this on Twitter, one of my followers actually brought up a really good point, that we can also see elements of a grand campaign in racing and sport games, where you're having to play over a series of matches or levels, and your points or your ranking carries over. For instance, when you play Mario Kart, every time you win, you get points that carry through to the next one during the cup, and whoever has the most points at the end wins. And of course with sports, and as we all know, I am an expert when it comes to footballs and stuff, you can't just win one play or one game and then go to the Super Bowl, as somebody who spent his life in Eagles territory can certainly attest to. But we can even talk about this in the roguelike genre, probably most notably lately with Darkest Dungeon. As anybody knows, in Darkest Dungeon, if you lose your entire party to a Shambler incident, they're not coming back, as I can certainly raise my hand to there. But you also have elements of persistence systems, how the hamlet grows with whatever heirlooms you find. As characters grow, they become more powerful. The key point, again, when it comes to talking about a grand campaign, is that elements carry over and they remain. And of course, you're probably wondering why I haven't mentioned it yet, but when we talk about a grand campaign design, the big daddy of it would of course be XCOM, whether it's the original or Firaxis' entries, where, again, as you play through it, your characters who survive go on to fight another day. They become more powerful. As you unlock new gear or you capture tech, that then gets fed back into the core gameplay loop. And as you play through the map, things are going to grow and change. A good win can certainly help you out in the next few runs, just as a bad loss may push you back a little bit. But ultimately, one of the key points about a grand strategy or grand campaign design is that it's always about the war, not just the battle. And this is where a lot of games that try to emulate this kind of grand strategy feel tend to slip up on. And we're going to switch to some game footage in a minute of a title we recently played that went that route. But before we do that, a few key points to keep in mind about grand strategy design or grand campaign design is that you need to be really careful with how much these battles are going to, or these events will impact the future. For instance, if you make things too strong, as in, if I don't win every single campaign or every single battle in a row, I will never be able to win, because I will always keep falling behind. On the other hand, if you make it too weak, then it's just basically, what's the point of it? Such as, let's say there's a grand campaign, but I only bring one unit after each battle, and I have an army of 50 or 60. Then that's not really going to do much. Another interesting example that I was just thinking about would be something like Peakman, where you have the persistence of your Peakman totals. So if you have a really bad battle or a boss fight, you lose like 300 of your Peakman in the process. Well, you're going to go do some farming there. But that also represents some of the challenges and considerations, and we're going to switch to some footage now. But before we do that, a quick word to our Patreon supporters. And now a quick shout out to the supporters over on patreon.com/GWBicer. So what we have here is Mutant Year Zero. This was a tactical strategy game that we played on stream. And it's a good example of the challenges of a grand campaign design. how the game works is that we have our crew of people, as you can see in the upper left, and their health and resources persist over how many battles, how many maps we play through until we hopefully get to the end or die trying. You can see in the upper right hand side the resources. They represented, I think, keys, scrap, which is basic currency, weapon parts, which are used to upgrade, and first aid kits, which are obviously used to heal. But the point about this game is that this is a title that makes use of fixed maps. What that essentially means is that there is a finite number of enemies, a finite number of resources, which also means a limited number of ways to actually upgrade your characters. But it still tries to make use of persistence, or that grand campaign style. Because whatever scrap I find, I can take back to our hub in order to buy more resources, or more items. The weapon parts I can use to upgrade weapons, improving their base damage as well as their crit, which, as anyone who's played a tactical strategy game knows, is a very big deal. But the problem that Mutant Year Zero faces is that by keeping with the persistence of a grand campaign, it is very punishing when you're playing this with a finite number of resources, and it creates a really good case for the hoarder syndrome. So what you saw right there when Selma just got attacked, that means after this battle is over, I'm going to have to heal her up, using up one of my 4 medkits. If I want to get more medkits, I'm going to need to either find them, hopefully, in the wilderness, or I'm going to have to spend scrap in order to refill. So what happens if I keep taking damage after each combat? Well, that means I'm going to have to keep using medkits. And I'm playing the game on the very hard difficulty, which the developer said is supposed to be the intended experience according to the description. But the problem is, when you're dealing with finite resources or finite progression, it makes it very easy for the player to screw themselves, either because they messed up too many times, or they made the wrong choices without actually realizing it. So, for instance, let's say that I'm playing a game where I can level up my weapons or level up my characters and make them stronger for 50 experience points. And you only get experience points by fighting enemies. And if we look at the general map of what the player can do, let's say there's only the possibility of getting 500 experience points. So what that means is that I will only have 10 times total to level up my character. So what happens if I give them the wrong stat point, or I get the wrong skill when I really want to do something else? Well, guess what? I'm screwed, because the game will not allow me to get anything more. And like I said, you need to be really careful with grand campaign design, that the battle should not cost the player the war. There should be a way for them to recoup or keep going. XCOM 2 was really good in this regard, with having the multiple ways of improving your characters, improving your base, and even with War of the Chosen, adding in those special characters. That if you did lose a battle, it didn't mean that your entire campaign was over. Even on the very hard, or the hardest difficulty level, you can still come back. It may be hard as hell, it may take you a while, but it's not the case where you lose a character, you might as well just restart your whole campaign, because you're never going to catch up. And this is what I was kind of worried about with Mutant Year Zero. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because there is a lot of loading in between, so we'll just let that go while I continue my train of thought. But another issue with Mutant Year Zero has to do with the stealth gameplay, and how it can be very punishing if you get detected. Because once you're detected, every enemy automatically knows where you're at. And if you're not careful, once again, one wrong move, and you're going to be wasting resources. And those resources do not come back. And again, it raises a very tricky challenge of grand campaign and grand strategy design. That if the player cannot recoup, then how are they supposed to make mistakes? Because you're not supposed to play a grand campaign game perfectly. That's never going to happen. Nobody's going to play Stellaris and say that every single thing happened exactly how they planned it. And this can be very frustrating, especially if you play something like XCOM or Mutant Year Zero that has Iron Man difficulty, where you lose, your save is done. Because nothing, again, annoys people more by saying, oh, you spent the last 10 hours playing, you made one mistake, say goodbye to your playthrough. At least with XCOM, it's Iron Man the fact that you can't save. And again, you can always recoup and go do something else. Mutant Year Zero doesn't have that. And again, that's a big point about the Grand Campaign. That this is typically why we see this in games built on random or procedural design. That the player can always have an out. If I have a bad battle in XCOM, again, I just go get another set of squaddies, we go do something else and train them up. We're going to be behind, but it's not game over. In Mutant Year Zero, I have a really bad battle that cost me all my med kits, and now I'm supposed to fight more? Well, I better hope I get really lucky with RNG, or I am completely screwed. Or, in this game, let's say I upgrade a weapon, and then I find something even better that I want to use, but I don't have any more weapon parts. It's not like I can just completely take everything back. You can scrap or mill your weapons to get back some of that cost, but I doubt they're going to give me the entire thing back. And again, this is the issue with the Grand Campaign design. That when you're dealing with finite resource or limitations, they can come back to hurt the player in a big way. But to begin to wrap things up, the reason why Grand Campaign design is so popular is that it gives that sense of connection between various matches or plays. And in cases like with XCOM or Stellaris or any of the other big name examples, it creates something that is greater than the sum of its parts. Again, something like Darkest Dungeon would not be the same game if every time your party dies in a dungeon, you just get them right back when you start playing again. It would completely ruin the death mechanic and the punishment and weight of playing. But at the same breath, you need to be careful with how punishing or rewarding your gameplay loop is when it comes to that persistence. If it's too great, then the player is just going to steamroll, and it goes back to that old school design of shmups, where it's more punishing to die because you lose all your power-ups, so the perfect run is actually easier than it is to die in those games. But if you make the loss too great, then it becomes a case of, I die, and now I'm being punished for the rest of my playthrough, and I will never get back to that point. So, for those of you watching this right now, can you think of great examples of titles that made use of a Grand Campaign style? And what are some elements that you're not particularly a fan of? Let me know in the comments below, but thank you for watching. Be sure to check back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom where we examine the art and science of games. And if you'd like to get mentioned on our Patreon thank you page, check out patreon.com/gwblazer. But until next time, have a great night. If you're looking for another book about game design, be sure to check out my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, out now. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.